All right, so we're going to get started. I still see some people trickling in here, so um, just bear with us. Welcome to our pre-Halloween session. We have called this one Blood-Curdling Blunders, Compliance Experts Sharing Stories of Slips, Snafus, and Singular Stupidity, which is very difficult to say this late in the day. um, Welcome to everyone. I'm Amy Wood. I'm joined by Joyce Weeks and Kelley, and our wonderful sponsor, Katie Nelson of Oryx Cloud Practice Management Solution. You'll get to know her in a little bit. And I wanted to start by just kind of going around and introducing everyone, or letting you guys introduce yourselves and really why we're doing this. So, Carol, let's start with you.
Oh, wait, am I supposed to tell the real reason why we're doing this, or the CE appropriate reason we're doing this? Oh,
Yes.
it's not just because we're a bunch of compliance nerds that love to hang out with each other and want to tell all these fun stories. Absolutely not. There's total educational reasons behind all this. But yeah, a couple of weeks ago, Amy and I have talked about doing something for the longest time, and we figured that this would be a really fun one to do for a Halloween themed. I'm actually thinking now we should do one for April Fools too, by the way. So stay tuned. But I'm Kelley. I am CEO of Clinical HR. I am a dental HR compliance expert. Been doing this for about 12 years now. As of this month, I'm starting my 12th year of dealing with dental HR compliance. And so I've been saying it for years. I've got stories. And tonight you get to hear some of them.
Okay, Joyce, what about you?
Hi, I'm Joyce Weeks. I am an OSHA and infection control compliance expert. I've been doing OSHA training for the past 9 years. I'm an owner of Dental Ed Inc. in San Diego, California. And I have a background in infectious disease. I have a master's in immunology and global health. I'm really happy to be here today and have lots of stories over the years. I have taken over my mom's company. So she taught OSHA and regulatory compliance for 35 years. And then I taken over, so I have 9 years experience myself. So between the two of us and a lot of other information, I have some interesting stories for you guys today.
And I'm Amy Wood. I am CEO of Copper Penny Consulting. I am in Northern California in beautiful wine country. And I am a HIPAA privacy and cybersecurity compliance expert. I do a lot in the way of data breach investigations. And while I will be sharing a lot of those stories today, I think it's important to know that all of us, not just me, we really, really want to do things proactively, not reactively.
You don't want to be a story.
No, we really don't want to use you as a story. These are cautionary tales that we will be sharing today. So I think the first question that we had for each other was, we all know we're experts, but what types of regulatory agencies or government agencies have you each worked with? Let's start with you, Joyce.
So on a regular basis, I talk to the Dental Board of California since I'm based in California. So most of my clients are here. And then we also talk with Cal OSHA primarily because in California, we have our own state agency that's stricter than the federal agency for OSHA. And then I also talk to the health department. So we have in San Diego, we actually have a local health department that inspects our offices, which is different than other parts of the country. So both for the radiation branch and also for the environmental health branch. So I've talked to inspectors pretty regularly from all of those different agencies.
Fun.
Yeah, it's great. They're very nice.
Yeah. On my side with the Department of Labor is going to be probably the number one that I get to speak with most often as investigators of the Department of Labor. I have had to have conversations with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and some of their representatives. And then I occasionally get to have conversations with Department of Homeland Security whenever I have questions about I-9s or people who can't provide the documentation for their I-9. So those have been some fun ones I get to chat with on a fairly regular basis.
Well, I have some big names in what I do too. I'm on a cybersecurity task force with Health and Human Services, creating the guidance for small practices. So I'm there representing kind of the redheaded stepchildren of healthcare, the dentists, chiropractors, ophthalmologists, kind of the outliers and fringes of healthcare, because what I deal with HIPAA, it applies to all healthcare entities, and the laws aren't really written well for those people. So I'm there trying to advocate for those small entities. I also work a lot with the FBI and various state attorney generals in data breaches and with cybersecurity incidents. And the first time FBI showed up on my caller ID, everyone in my office freaked out. And now it's not as bad. They're not going, oh my God, the FBI is calling. But it was definitely a scary thing the first few times it happened. And I'm like, we're fine. It's not us they're calling about. But yeah, those are kind of my big names. So we wanted to get into a lot of the stories. So we kind of wanted to start with the worst case scenario and the most expensive incident you've ever had to deal with, the one that costs the practice the most amount of money. Kara, you've always got the great ones on this, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I have probably two. One's an embezzlement case. And then the other one is misclassification. So the misclassification, I had a client, multiple locations. I think there's like 4 or 5 locations, and they were looking at selling the practice. But we had just taken them on as a client. This was back when I worked at the CPA firm. And then like a couple weeks after they signed with us, just for like tax and accounting stuff, they get a notice from the IRS because they were being audited for misclassification. They had about 15 or so dental associates, and 2 of them were classified as employees and 13 of them were classified as independent contractors. And this was back I think they were investigating 2018. So 2018, this was where we still had some practices that still were trying to insist that independent contractor was the appropriate worker classification for their dental associates. And they, wanted to have the argument of this is the way it's always been done, that we have a contract with them, and they did. They have S corps, they are paying their own taxes, and those things were all true. But at the end of the day, and when I say the end of the day, I mean, it literally took about a year and many binders of paperwork and hours of conversation and multiple interviews with the IRS. At the end of the day, they were deemed to have misclassified those 13 independent contractors. And the biggest reason they said that this was misclassification was because they did not have the opportunity for loss. They may have had their own business. They may have had their own business entity, but they weren't running their own business within this practice. They weren't specialists who would maybe come to the practice like an endo coming to a general once a month and working on their patients and maintaining the records and bringing their own team and using their own supplies and doing their own marketing and their own networking and so on and so forth. They had no opportunity for loss because the team was provided, the supplies were provided, the patients were fed to them, the patient records belonged to the practice. They were also getting health insurance benefits as contractors, which was kind of interesting. And the final award, which my client wanted to push back on and say, can we continue to argue this? I said, well, right now they're investigating the 1 year, but if you want to push back and they disagree, then they can open it up to the 4 years that they're allowed to audit. So for the 1 year, it was $142,000 was the fine for back taxes and penalties owed. And that was before the state got involved, because the federal and the state, they do talk. So unemployment office, got involved with that as well, because they weren't paying unemployment tax on the amount that was paid to the contractors when they were misclassified. So that was their initial fine. I think the second one was an embezzlement case, which was equally as interesting. I had another client. They were older, they were looking to retire, wondering what their cash flow looked like, why they couldn't retire. They kept, not being able to afford bills, not being able to pull money out the way that they should have been. And they come home one day and get a notice on their front door from an investigator, a police investigator, and said, hey, give us a call. And they did. And what had happened was their front desk had been issuing retroactive discounts through their credit card machine. So the patient would come in and they would pay, and then the patient would leave and they would issue them a discount. But the discount wasn't going to the patient, it was going to a singular account. And the merchant service company, after 2.5, 3 years, figured all this out and called the police, and the police contacted my client. And at the time, it was something like 125, 130,000 over the 3-year period that they were looking. They continued to dig after all of this, and it went up to somewhere closer to 200,000 at the end of it. They told me that the hardest thing they ever had to do was give that woman her paycheck that Friday, because the investigator, this was like a Thursday, the investigator said, don't say anything to her. We're going to come and arrest her in your office on like 7:15 on Tuesday morning. So just, don't say anything just yet. We don't want her to bolt. So yeah, they had to hand that woman her paycheck on Friday and not say a word. And she was arrested. She got let out and was back working for another practice several weeks later, interestingly enough, because, dental practices don't conduct background checks. So nothing pulled up. But those, I think, were probably the two more expensive ones that I've had to work with in the last 5 or so years.
Awesome.
No.
I was just going to say, yeah, they really don't do background checks, I've noticed.
No, they don't. They should, but they don't.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm now teaching mandatory opioid prescribing courses, and that's one thing that they're supposed to do for their DEA license. And I've been noticing that's not being done either. So it's not just...
They run a Google search, or they say, well, I just go and check the state records. And I'm like, you realize people work and live and travel outside of the state and commit crimes elsewhere, right? Okay. That's not going to cover you. That's not a background check.
Well, Joyce, what about you? What's your most expensive?
So we're kind of an interesting case because we've actually never had an office fine.
Me either. But I've had extra costs.
Yeah. So it's kind of because usually like the way that it works for us and in like my field with infection control and OSHA, usually like it's kind of a fix-it ticket. So an office will contact us and say, we just got inspected by OSHA or the health department or the dental board, and we have this list of all these things we're supposed to do. We need help doing that. So we go in and help them and, assist. Or it's an office that we're already working with and they call us when they get inspected. We talk to the inspector to, show all those changes and then they're okay. So that's kind of been our experience. But I do know from talking to inspectors that one of the biggest issues that they see is unsecured oxygen tanks, because those, if they fall over during a earthquake, because we're in San Diego, hello, California, we have those here. Then that's like a missile through the office and it can hurt somebody. So that's like a pretty big fine. And when I was checking, it's like around 15,000 is like the most that they can charge for that. Some of the other things that we see really, really frequently would be like a disgruntled employee calling OSHA or the board on their employer because they're upset about, being fired, which would be more under, obviously, Kara's kind of side as well. But we would help if they get called by OSHA or the board with documenting what OSHA and the board are looking at. So there's that component. And then the other thing that we see too would be like workers' comp injuries. So not following infection control guidelines, like not wearing utility gloves when processing instruments is just something that like no one does. I can count on like one hand how many times I actually find utility gloves in offices. They're just never there, to the point where I went to a convention recently and actually was going to like different booths where they were selling gloves to try to find utility gloves to like, try to recommend to clients. And they didn't even know what I was talking about. Like they're just nowhere. It's bad. But yeah, so those are the kind of the three things that I see.
You'd be surprised how much that kind of stuff crosses over on terminations. I actually had a call today where it was to the insurance companies that this disgruntled now former employee is calling the insurance companies and reporting that the practice is giving discounts for religious purposes, I believe was the claim of it. Yeah, it's not true, but that's what this person, she's unhappy with how things ended. She's demanding certain wages, certain payment for things that she may or may not have done, but they have no record of. It's kind of a hot mess. And that's what she's doing. She's reaching out to the insurance companies. And I've heard that before, where they reach out to workers' comp, where they reach out to OSHA, they reach out to the dental board and try to make claims that may or may not be true. Typically the burden of proof ends up being on them. But in the meantime, the practice ends up having to deal with the audit or whatever the fallout is. Whether they get fined or not, they still have to deal with the time of
and loss of production.
Yeah.
Huge pain for sure. What about you, Amy? What have you seen?
Yes, what's your most expensive?
Yeah.
So I have done just over 400 data breach investigations in the last 10 years. And it's kind of a toss up. My most expensive story is either my own or my very first client. So I'll share both. My own involved my dental x-rays being involved in a data breach. And the very short version of that story is I had upper and lower jaw realignment surgery 13 years ago now. And the imaging center where they were taken, like the panos were taken, had been acquired by the hospital across the street. And when the IT department came over, the front desk lady working there had never really worked with that caliber of IT. They had just hired what we call a break fix guy in the industry, someone you hire hourly. And so she didn't trust this group of geeks. And I say that lovingly, I'm married to one, I can use that term. And this lady copied thousands of x-rays onto a thumb drive. And unbeknownst to everyone involved, those x-rays for many years had this standard protocol where they would put the name, birth date, social security number, and the insurance medical record number in plain text on those images. And so when that thumb drive that had all those x-rays on it went missing, it somehow made its way to the dark web. And I've actually been sold over 60,000 times. And those 4 pieces of information are worth just under $400, which is only mildly insulting given what I do for a living. But the consequences of that have been just catastrophic. I've had financial identity theft. I've had medical identity theft. I had someone try to impersonate me to get surgery last year. And it's constantly dealing with things. And for me as a patient, it's very frustrating. Me as a data breach consultant, incredibly frustrating. Me as a proactive compliance person, it's just mind-boggling that even hearing a story like this, these doctors are often not understanding that you're playing with someone's life and their ability to get credit and to live their life, or in my case, run a business, or let alone 2, which is what I've been doing for the last, decade. And it's not just for me. The hospital ended up having to pay almost $3 million just in out-of-pocket costs. They received no fines, no penalties. That was just the mitigation cost. And so for one person making an error, just trying to help. Now, on my client side, the very first data breach I did was a server that was stolen over Christmas break, way back in 2013. And the thieves broke in by taking the hinge pins off the doors of the basement, and they stole the unencrypted server. And this doctor ended up doing everything wrong, and it was a tiny 3-operatory practice, and I worked my butt off, and I showed up to that first meeting with a Costco-sized bottle of vodka and said, we're going to get through this, it's going to be okay, let's start right now. And she just did everything wrong, because what seemed intuitive to this doctor was the exact opposite of what needed to happen. And in the end, it cost almost $280,000 out of pocket. No fines, no penalties, no patient lawsuits. Everything ended up being recouped after a few years. And I actually still work with the doctor that bought that practice. But it was a brutal few years. And I don't want other practices to ever have to go through that. So that's my most expensive story.
That could also probably fall into our next question of most dramatic story.
I actually have a different one for that. It's even more dramatic.
More dramatic. Okay. I want to hear it.
Okay, I'll start. So it was actually one of my clients. It was his wife, who was an OBGYN and had a separate practice. And I know, just never ends. So the OBGYN's office, it was this doctor that was married to one of my dentists, and she had a business partner, another female OBGYN. And this was a very, very busy practice. They had not invested in proactive IT security, and their server got hacked, and it was being used as what's called a relay server. So basically it was being used to hide dark web activities like drug trafficking, human trafficking, all kinds of things like that. It's weird how my worlds have merged at this point. And when faced with this problem of we can't print from our practice management, it turned out to be, oh, your server is actually being used by hackers in China. And when we said, okay, this is the one and only situation where I'm a mandatory reporter, like I can't turn someone in for violating HIPAA or breaching patient information. Like I don't do that. I am not a mandatory reporter. But when there is an active cyber incident that involves nation state hacking, I am obligated under my relationship with the FBI to report that. And so I tried to work with the doctors to make provisions for having another server so that they could still see patients and preserve the evidence, because that's a crime scene. And the doctor married to the dentist that was my client said, yes, absolutely, let's do that. We need to protect our patients. And the other doctor said, all this because we can't print. I think we're not going to spend the money. And so I said, but here's the deal. Like, I already called my buddies at the FBI and they're on their way to take possession of your server. And I can't do anything once they do that. You're going to be dead in the water. And this doctor said, nope, I'm not paying for that. And I'm not allowing them into my practice. And I mean, this woman was off her rocker. And sure enough, the next day, the FBI, my contacts called me and said, yep, we did take possession of the server. She turned into a Karen. It was very interesting. He actually used those words, and they still took possession of the server. They're legally allowed to do so. And from what I heard, about a week later, they were able to fully determine that server had been used to cover and hide evidence of human organ trafficking. Like they were selling kidneys and eyeballs and all of that illegally using this server. So yes, that's my most dramatic.
Well, that just because I can't print.
Yes. So I mean, like the whole moral of the story is you can't print, but your server was affecting other people's lives, and maybe don't be selfish.
The moral of the story is we like to work with clients who value compliance and value what we do. And aren't going to push back on because we can't print.
Yeah. So dramatic enough?
Yeah, a little bit. Speaking of that, though, working with clients and working with companies that are compliant, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to work with orgs for this particular event. Katie, I know you had a couple of things you want to say. You want to share a story for us?
Yeah, actually today, in fact, I was speaking with an office that is going to be getting signed up with orgs, and she was telling me that the process needs to speed up a little bit because they're in the process of purchasing a practice, and this practice that they're purchasing had a storm and water damage, and it affected their server, and their server was not backed up properly. And so they lost information from like mid 2020 to the end of 2021, and they lost all of their AR. So it wasn't stolen, but it's gone. They have no record of any patient appointments that are on the books. So they have patients walking in the door saying, I'm here for my appointment. And they say, oh, great. Who are you? What's your name? Let me get you on the schedule. Hopefully we have a chair. I mean, just pure chaos. And they can't collect any of the balances that are pending out there because they have zero record of it. So
They have nothing, no backup whatsoever.
They had no backup. Right.
Sorry.
So it was pretty ironic that I had that conversation today and knew I was coming on here. So, I mean, it happens, I think, more frequently than anybody realizes. So this nice woman who is the doctor's wife who I was speaking with, she said, so we cannot wait to get on the cloud. We cannot wait to make sure that our data is secure and you guys are handling everything for us. Because I think 90% of the data breaches out there are independent offices that are storing I'm making up random percentages, but I mean, it's usually somebody improperly storing their information in their office on their server. Mm-hmm. And we really want to take control of that for these offices and help with the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, because backup can get very expensive very quickly. And, cloud is great in a lot of circumstances. And especially if you're in an area that's prone to natural disasters. Absolutely.
They're in California too.
Sorry. Joyce and I are both in California. We get all kinds of weird, like it used to be called the land of fruits and nuts, and it's aptly named. There's all kinds of weird stuff that happens here more than anywhere else. So, I mean, we are grateful to have Katie here. Oryx has been someone I've been referring to for quite some time. For HIPAA, one of the key components of making sure that a vendor is compliant with HIPAA and definitely secure is kind of twofold. There's the business associate agreement, which everyone knows you need to have one of those. And the second part is doing a due diligence review. And I've been doing these for over 10 years, and I've had vendors threaten to sue me just for asking questions. I've had pushback, I've had lies, I've had all kinds of stuff over the years. So moral of that story is trust but verify. And Oryx was one of the first that came out and said, we want to be transparent. We want to be brutally honest about everything. And so I'm happy to sing anyone's praises. And I will say that Oryx was the first cloud practice management system in dental to do so. And they are still the loudest when it comes to, we've got our act together. So that's why we invited Oryx to come and help with us.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. So tell us all about Oryx. It's all yours.
So we are full practice management software. And the other nice thing about that is instead of having your server-based system needing all of the different add-on softwares to come into your server and have access to that patient data, everything's done in one place. So it limits the amount of people who have access to your patient's data. And then when we're sharing that information back to patients, everything is done through a secure patient portal. We are not just taking a patient's treatment plan and sending it via traditional email. Anything can be shared back with them. They're logging into that portal, verifying it's them. So we take that very seriously and keep it secure. And we often have offices say, oh, can I just email this directly to the patient? Or can I share their x-rays directly to them? And for Amy's answer earlier, no, you can't. We have the security in place to protect you, to protect your patient. So sometimes trying to get that across to offices, maybe somebody doesn't have the background knowledge to really truly understand why we're keeping things so secure for the patients. But once they understand,
I'm the problem.
Once they understand it, it's like, I feel like their eyes open and they say, oh, wow, this is really how I should have been doing it all along. And it can be pretty life-changing. We also are making sure that any person in the office who has access to the software has limitations on what they can do. The doctors can get this all set up to make sure that they're only logging in while they're at the office. That's all based on their IP address. Or if it is a trusted employee, that they are enabling two-factor authentication every single time that they log in to make sure that it's them. Somebody else didn't get a hold of their password. But we would love to meet any of your clients, all of you. I feel like cloud software is the way that the world is switching to. Absolutely. It takes so much pressure off of the offices. It gives them so much more freedom and flexibility. And Oryx itself is evidence-based. We partner with Dr. John Kois from the Kois Center. So we have just an amazing patient experience clinical module built in, besides all of the great admin tools that are keeping everything safe and secure.
And I will say my inner feminist is super excited that it was created by a woman.
Yes.
It's not that common in this industry. So I'm really, really excited to brag about that.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Rania created the software, and she was a practicing female dentist, had her own little brainchild of how she can just make things better and more streamlined in the practice. And luckily enough, her husband is the IT technical genius who was able to help her create it, partnered with Dr. Kois, and it's just spiraled from there. So it's pretty awesome.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're incredibly happy to have you. And like I said, a lot of this is one of the reasons why we like to partner with companies like you, because we have clients that really, truly care. We have clients that don't want to be stories like this. I know one of the ones that I talked about when we were having our conversation about this is kind of why these stories happen. A lot of them ends up being a lack of process. It ends up being a lack of a culture where we have a see something, say something. So one of my less compliance side stories, but more on the lack of process stories. Is I had a client last year or so that it was a multiple location practice and nobody really knew what was going on at the practice level. The practice leadership mostly worked at headquarters, from what I understood. They didn't really have anybody that was managing things, and they didn't have the expectation for the office managers or even the dental associates that if you see something, you need to say something. You need to make sure that we're aware of what's going on. Well, they had an employee that had called in sick that day, and they didn't show up for work, and they couldn't find the curing light. So they call her, and it turns out she had taken it home. Her kid was sick. She wasn't able to bring it back that day, but she took it home. And they're like, well, why did she take the curing light home? And after several more phone calls back and forth between places, apparently she had been taking the curing light home a lot, several months, in fact, because she had gotten the material to make retainers, and she was going home and making retainers and selling them on social media for half price. She originally told them that she took it home because she had one of her own at home and it broke, and she wanted to try to fix it. And so she took that one home just to see if she could figure out how to fix her curing light. Well, that's not really what was happening. And what dental assistant has a curing light at home? What dental assistant has a multiple $1,000 piece of equipment at home just to play with? No, she'd been making retainers. The funny part of that is that the office manager knew about this and didn't say anything. The dental associate knew about this and didn't say anything. And the kicker was that she had actually been doing something similar about 6 months before, where she was making them on her lunch break with the curing light, paying for the supplies herself, but still doing it like in the office, and somehow didn't manage to get fired for it the first time. She has been since separated from the practice. She did get fired for it for that time. But just the fact that we didn't have any kind of reporting process, any kind of expectation of, I don't know, maybe somebody should say something about the dental assistant practicing dentistry without a license and using our equipment at home, kind of was part of that culture and part of that lack of process that we don't like to see. That's how many of these stories come up.
Well, and Joyce and I both teach California Dental Practice Act. So we both know that doing things outside the scope of your job role is a big, big, big no-no.
Well, and using practice equipment for things that it's not intended. One of my other probably more dramatic stories from this year is I had a mobile dental practice that they had an employee who went to a conference and there was some misconduct. And so they let them go on Monday morning. Monday afternoon, they call me because they need to write a termination letter. And so they said, this was all happening this last weekend when they were at the conference, but here's the kicker. After we let them go, we got a call from the sheriff from the county that they were in for this conference. And it turns out they had used the practice vehicle to solicit the sale of drugs and prostitution at like 2:00 in the morning on Saturday. So, well, here's the good news. You don't have to include that in the termination letter because that wasn't the reason you fired them.
Wow. Joyce, what about you? Do you have anything? It's hard to top that one.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to top that. So for me, we're talking about stories of lack of process. And what came to mind for me was probably the most compliance issues that I've ever seen in an office. Funnily enough, we weren't asked back before I even get into the next part. And so I was kind of trying to remember all the different pieces of it. But I think that this happened when I'd been teaching for maybe like 2 or 3 years or so. So it's still relatively new. And I walked into this office with my mom, who I was working with at the time. And she went into the back to do like an assessment to look at all their processing and everything. And I'm in the front, like setting everything up to do the class, because we normally do a presentation in the waiting room with like PowerPoint and that kind of thing, or we do Zoom. It sort of depends on if they're in town and what the office prefers. Anyway, so I'm in the waiting room and I look around and I'm like, I don't feel comfortable sitting down. Like, it looks really dirty out here. And I have 2 boys, like I'm not easily, and 2 dogs, like big dogs. I'm not easily grossed out, but I was like, I don't think I want to sit. So I was just kind of standing, like looking around. My mom like motions at me, like, you need to come here, like, come here. It's like, okay. I walk into the back with her. She takes me to sterilization and opens up this container where they have cold sterile and there's mold growing inside. Gross. And for those of you who don't know what cold sterile is, just in case there's anybody who doesn't, it's supposed to sterilize instruments, i.e. kill mold, not grow it.
Ew.
Yeah.
I have a dentist appointment on Friday. I'm getting a filling replaced, and I'm gonna look. It's not my specialty, but I'm gonna look.
You're gonna be like, can I see your back room? Can I see the sterilization area? I need to. Yeah.
I trust you, but I'm gonna verify.
Right. Trust but verify. That's what this means today.
So I've got my friend Joyce with me today, and
she's on Zoom. She's on the phone. Like, don't mind her. She's just a little head on my phone. It's fine. No, so like that was pretty gross. I mean, and they hadn't flushed the toilet. And that was just like some of the stuff, but like no instruments weren't in packaging, which in California is required. Like everything has to go in the package before it's sterilized. Different states have different requirements, but that's kind of standard. Some states you can do anyway, there's some differences, but here everything has to be. But I mean, it was just like nothing was being done correctly. So it was pretty bad. But the reason we got called in is because the assistant was threatening to leave unless we came in because he thought that we could fix it. And we walked in and we're like, you're not following any, like, there's nothing that you're doing that's in requirements here. Like,
just gonna go get my caution tape and we're just gonna shut down for about a month.
I don't work for the board, but right now I feel like I need to call them, and we don't do that. I'm not licensed, so I'm not legally required to. If I see something where there's been one time where my mom has actually threatened. I haven't had to so far. And it was an office where, well, we'll probably tell you about it later, where there's one time. But yeah, that was the mold growing in cold sterile. Like, how? Obviously it never been changed.
So y'all, when y'all ask these questions about what do I have my team do whenever I'm gone on vacation or whenever a patient canceled, deep cleaning should be at the top of your list, apparently.
I just feel bad for the patients. I mean, more than anything, it's not just the team, it's not the office, it's not the doctor, woe is me in their bank account that we always hear. I feel really bad for the patients that would have to experience that and be exposed to that. I mean, we're all here grossed out, but really all these stories affect the patients. Maybe I'm just more sensitive to it because of what I've had happen, but yeah, the patients. And I think we're still talking about process, but mine actually segues into the next one, which is the most obscure compliance thing that no one really thinks about. I always talk about people, process, and technology, and you have to have them layer in the right way. And so my favorite data breach that I've ever worked on was also the most interesting and the most obscure. Like, it was like that JFK magic bullet. Like, it had to break through every last layer of defense in order for it to work. It was an older doctor that decided to sell the practice. And it turns out that the office manager had been embezzling for a long time. And the obscure part was this office still had a lot of paper charts. They didn't really use them for anything, but they had always been there as a status symbol behind the front desk visually. And we don't do that anymore. There are better things you can do to show that you're a great office. Paper charts is not one of them. And so they still had these, and the office manager was also a patient of the practice, which is very common benefit. Come to the practice, be a patient. Kara can attest to that. There's all kinds of things they do wrong there too. But this office manager had been hiding the details of her embezzlement, very detailed notes in her own paper chart. And it gets better. So then the doctor sells the practice, and the new doctor is buried up to her eyeballs in debt, as many new doctors are. And so every penny counts, and she starts looking at the numbers, and something is off. It always looks correct on the day sheet, but it's just overall, it just seems weird. And so the office manager started getting freaked out, and she decided to stage a break-in after hours. And she roughed the place up, kicked in the back door, set off the alarm, stole a couple laptops, of course, a handful of charts, including her own. And I get a frantic call at 0:30, saying, please drive here. It's 2 hours away. I show up still in my pajamas, but I managed to brush my teeth because, priorities. You brush your teeth before you go to the dentist, even if it's just a client. And so I get there, and she's just in tears and freaking out. And the office manager is the best actress ever. I mean, I was even convinced, and my BS meter is pretty good. And then I'm trying to calm the doctor down and saying, it's going to be okay. This isn't even the worst thing I've dealt with this year. It's fine. It's going to be okay. Like, let's go get mimosas. It'll be okay. Right. And so while that's all happening, I get a call from IT. And they're just very quietly say, I really don't want to tell you this, but it looks like that Wi-Fi you had us set up specifically for the staff, that the office manager's cell phone auto-connected to the staff Wi-Fi in the middle of the night. What time was the break-in? And so we had technology that showed definitive proof of that cell phone logging in at that time. And so I had to very carefully and quietly go to the police officers. One stayed with that office manager and asked more stupid questions just to waste time. And the doctor and the other officer and I went around the corner and I said, you need to go to that gas station and see if you can get even a partial plate from the cameras from that gas station, because I have this piece of evidence that says that woman right there with your partner was breaking into this office at this time. And so they were able to get most of the plate. They got all but the last character or letter on it. It was California one, so it was a letter. And they were able to arrest her. They went to her home and they were able to retrieve the laptops. And through computer forensics, we were able to determine that that data had not been copied or disseminated. And we have written attestation that the paper charts, I mean, there wasn't time. It was like within hours, and she had to be there to give her sob story to the cops. So in that case, it wasn't actually a reportable incident, but it definitely was a situation that having the right process in place helped to make sure that when we had all our ducks in a row, that we actually did have our ducks in a row. Like it wasn't a major catastrophe. It was just a minor inconvenience. A tear-filled one, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Okay,
No, based on the little thing you would have never thought of, the Wi-Fi in the middle of the night.
The moral of the story is if you're going to commit a crime, don't bring a tracking device with you. And also don't be a crappy person.
Yeah, there's that too.
You just don't commit a crime.
Joyce, what about you? What's your most obscure things that nobody thinks of?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I don't have like an obscure situation really. The big thing that I like to say that most people don't know though, is that the inspectors like for OSHA and the health department and the dental board are not actually as scary as most people think that they are. And they're also not like looming outside your office waiting to come in. Most of those agencies are severely understaffed. There's not a lot of people. The board, they and OSHA only come up there's a complaint against your office. So they're not going to come in for no reason. They won't warn you that they're coming either, but they're not going to just randomly show up for no reason. Like there has to be a reason for them to go there. And I think that for me, the one thing that I was going to talk about was that there was one office that it wasn't a client of ours. We heard about it from a client who knew of this office where OSHA went to do an inspection of the office, and the office manager refused entry for the inspector. And with the dental board, you can't refuse them entry because you could do things that can harm patients, but with OSHA, you can. They'd have to come back with a search warrant. And so the office manager was like, no, you have to wait until the doctor's here. So then the office manager came back, OSHA came back and talked to the doctor. The doctor refused to let them in. So then the inspector had to go and get a search warrant. And by then it was like 4 hours after they had tried to do the inspection. As you can imagine, that inspector was not very happy because their day had been completely wasted just trying to do a simple inspection of this office. And so they cited them for all kinds of stuff. And the one that stood out to me when I heard this telling was that they cited this office for not having a cover on their toilet paper roll. They said that it was unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Now, obviously, that's not going to stand up in court when, the doctor has to go into court and go through every single thing and fight each individual compliance issue and all of that. But think of all the lost production that that office is going to have to face now because they just weren't cordial and cooperative and, just let the person come in and see you do their job. So we always suggested, just be kind, let them come in, look at what they need to look at. And then, whenever they're done, like if you have somebody that you're working with that's helping you with OSHA and compliance stuff, contact that person and they will help you with whatever it is, whatever changes need to be made. That's what we do for our clients. But yeah, that was the most like random thing that we saw somebody getting in trouble for.
I think mine, it's one of those ones that I know and I'll tell my clients about whenever they have these types of situations. I had a client who actually attended one of my lectures like a year before, and they were doing all the things that I had told them to do, but they got a surprise audit by Department of Labor. And when I say surprise, I really say that in air quotes because they had an employee who they let go. She had gotten COVID and they let her go, but not because she got COVID. They let her go because she texted the office manager's wife talking about how much of the office manager's wife was, meaning to text a friend, but texted the wife by accident, who was also a doctor, by the way. And so they terminated her for that, for calling her, that starts with B. So then they get an audit from the Department of Labor, and they came in and they looked at everything, and everything was perfectly fine, except for their bonus structure. There are two different types of bonus structures. There's discretionary and non-discretionary. And most of the dentists I talk to will push back on that and say, well, it's my discretion to give a bonus at all. And so they're all discretionary. Well, they don't actually look at it that way. If there is an actual way for them to earn the bonus, if you have a structure, like most of the bonus plans that get recommended by all of the consultants and all of the HR people and all of the dental Facebook groups, all these a certain percentage of collections or some metric that you have to hit to be able to earn this bonus, that's considered non-discretionary. And per Fair Labor Standards Act, for non-exempt employees, you have to pay an overtime premium for any hours worked during that bonus period on that bonus. So if you have a monthly bonus and they've worked 5 hours of overtime, you're actually supposed to pay time and a half premium, overtime premium for the bonus amount for those hours worked for overtime. Nobody knows that. Nobody does it, but that's what they got dinged on by the Department of Labor. It wasn't a huge fine. It was something like $1,200. They didn't have that much overtime, but it's just one of those little obscure things that nobody thinks about.
Happens.
Indeed. We 10 minutes left or so and a couple of questions. Do you want to do like a lightning round where we asked our last couple and try to answer in like 30 seconds or less?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What is the most money you have ever saved a client?
Mine was almost $500,000.
Yikes. Wow. Quick story, 30 seconds. What was it for?
It was actually the one that ended up costing her $280,000 out of pocket.
So it could have gone higher.
It was going to be a lot higher. The IT guy was awful and said, I don't believe in firewalls and encrypted email. Meanwhile, had all the operatory computers on chunks of styrofoam for flood control. Like, it was just, it could have been a lot worse. And I finally just had to say, you got to knock it off. Like, you're making it worse. Stop it. You're making my eye twitch. Yeah. So that one.
Joyce, what about you? What's the most you've ever saved a client?
Well, like I said, we haven't had office fine, so yeah, a lot.
All of
Whatever
that.
fines are. I mean, I know OSHA can fine you anywhere from $1,500 to $150,000 from what I just saw. So.
Yikes. Wow. Mine is probably based on I-9s. I have a practice that had around 30 employees and they were not doing I-9s at all across multiple employees across multiple states. Some of them required to do E-Verify, not doing them at all. And if they deem it to be substantive negligence, they can charge you up to $15,000 per missing form. If they say that you intentionally did not do them. So it was somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 with the number of employees that they had. All right, next question. Who was your most stubborn client, or story of your most stubborn clients that will not listen?
Well, mine is actually the same office. Like I said, horrible IT guy, ended up being in 8 other of my data breach investigations before the guy finally forcibly retired. The doctor really wanted to do things her way. And I finally just had to say, I'm going to take all your decision-making abilities away from you if you want your practice to come back from the dead, because that's where it's heading right now. Yes, very stubborn. And in the end, she ended up hugging me. And it was weird for both of us because neither of us are huggy people. But she was so, so grateful, especially when she was able to sell the practice.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, happy ending story.
Yeah.
Joy?
So most stubborn client. Well, I don't really, so usually when we have stubborn clients, they tend to just not call us back to reschedule for the next year, and we don't contact them either. It's kind of like a win-win. But I have had some entertaining stories of people doing funny things when we're teaching. So we've had some people taking shots when we're doing compliance training and saying, like, whenever someone says OSHA or compliance or something like that, doing a shot on Zoom. That was 2020, so I think we'll allow it because we all
get a mulligan for that. Everyone did.
I was like,
I had one of those. I had one of those that was not on Zoom, and it was the dental associate convincing the hygienist to take shots when they were still seeing patients in the office.
Oh,
so then that's not as good. We've been called names. I mean, yeah, to our face and like when we weren't supposed to hear, but when Zoom wasn't muted and things like that. I mean, it's just all kinds of stuff where you're kind of like, oh, and it kind of leads into the question that we have next, which is, have you ever had to fire a client? Which again, haven't told, like, I mean, there have been some where we're just like, this doesn't seem to be working for either of us anymore. Let's just not do this. But yeah, that's definitely been a situation sometimes. What about you, Kara? What have you had for most stubborn client?
One of my most stubborn recently, I guess within the last year or so, I had a client who their employee got injured at the practice. They had the saloon doors coming out of Siri, and a patient was walking down the hall and saw the door kind of opening. And so they pushed back against it and hit her in the face, and she ended up with like a mini concussion or something. So she gets on workers' comp. She's having migraines. The practice leaders felt like she was abusing the workers' comp, that she was kind of milking it. And not doing anything she should have been. And so we kind of worked through what we do with some of that, worked through light duty. Well, they kept coming back and saying, we really would like to let her go. We really think she's milking it. We really want to let her go. And I'm like, okay, but she's on workers' comp. She got injured at your practice. You cannot do that. You cannot do that for her being on light duty and for her not being able to work and taking breaks and going to see, doctor and things like that. You can't do it while she's on workers' comp. And quite honestly, the guidance that I've received from attorneys is that up to about 6 months after she gets released from workers' comp is really kind of a protected space where they can deem it to be workers' comp retaliation. But they kept coming back with, well, what if we do it this way? Or what if we send her home? So we don't have any light duty and we just send her home and just, maybe pay her for a couple of weeks and then hire somebody else to fill her space. And when she's off light duty and ready to come back, we'll just tell her that her job's not there anymore. Like, again, you can't do that. I finally had to tell them, I'm like, look, you need to go talk to your attorney. We're at a point where I have said the same thing 4 times, literally, that you cannot fire this person right now. If you're really intent on going that direction, go seek legal counsel, please. Because I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice.
That's true for all of us, by the way. We're not attorneys.
That's true. All of this is for informational purposes. None of it is legal advice. We are not attorneys. And more importantly, we are not your attorneys. We may be some of your advisors if you have engaged us, but if you haven't, then again, just as informational purposes and fun and light. I really hope you've enjoyed this tonight. I think we've all had some pretty fun little stories that we wanted to share for a while. Amy, do you want to finish off for us with your most stubborn and or clients that you fired?
Yes, I had one that was actually from a vendor. So a practice management vendor many, many moons ago, did not, and Katie's perked up on this. So this was a vendor on the East Coast that, before they had more standardized options for updating CDT codes, every practice had to manually put them in. And the practice I was working with had done so, and the practice management vendor wanted to replicate that. And they asked permission. The practice said, no, you cannot take a copy of it to do the work that we did by hand. And they did it anyway and distributed not just the CDT codes, but the entire practice management database with all the patient information in it, and sent it to all of their other dental practice customers. customers. One of those practices had made a backup on a home backup drive, and it was spewing all this information out to the internet, and a security researcher found it. And it turned into a whole thing. And the vendor was trying to hide it, and the doctor was trying to hide it. And I got to a point where I had everyone on a phone call, including the attorneys. And I said, look, I can't care about your patients and the outcome of this more than you do. So at this point, I need to walk away, and I hope for everybody's sake that you do the right thing. And it felt so good to do that because you can't help everyone, but sharing these stories today, it's been more about just showing what people are doing wrong and how to not be like those people. So that was kind of the hardest one I've ever had to deal with. So as I know we're gonna, but right up against that 5 o'clock. I know we started right a couple minutes late, so I'll make sure that we stay a little bit. In the meantime, I want to make sure that you guys have everybody's information. So let me share this really quick so everybody has it. And this is everyone's contact information. Let me make that screen just a little bit bigger. I swear I used to own an IT company. I do know how to do technology. And we want to thank Katie at Oryx. Again, we'll make sure that we send out everybody's contact information after, and we'll send you that in a thank you email as well for everyone that attended.